Say you're sorry. The words hit like a slap. No warning. No build-up. Just shouted, sharp and full of fury, hurled across the porch like a weapon. I stood still. 2 boxes in my hands. The late sunlight warm on my back. My chest tightening, not from fear, but from something deeper. Something older. Not disbelief. Not even anger. Recognition. Across from me, Mara, my daughter-in-law, stood in the doorway, red-faced and breathless. Eyes hard. Hands balled at her sides. You went through our things. You crossed a line. And until you apologize, you're not welcome here. You should consult us before making any changes or going through our things. This is our house and we are planning to move here soon. We are tired of living in that small rented apartment. You are already too old. You should move to old age home, said Mara. I turned, slowly, silently, to look at my son. Michael. My boy. He didn't speak. Didn't step in. Didn't defend. Just stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the porch floor like it might open up and swallow him whole. No protest. No question. Not even a glance in my direction. Only silence. And in that silence I made a decision. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I read every single one. Now, back to the moment it all began. My name is Eleanor Parker. I'm 78 years old. And until last week, I lived in that house. I built that home with my husband, Greg Parker, brick by brick, memory by memory. He died 14 years ago, sudden heart failure. One minute he was in the garden planting rosemary, and the next, I was standing in the ER with dirt still on his hands and no pulse in his chest. We buried him on a Tuesday. I wore the same cardigan I had on when he kissed me goodbye that morning. I still have it. And I stayed in that house. For Michael. For Sophie. For tradition. Until the day they shouted me off the porch. This is the story of what happened after that. Of what I did when they thought I'd break. Of what it really means to walk away with your spine intact. Let's begin. The door creaked softly behind me as I stepped into my own home, not theirs, mine. The air was too still. The kind of still that settles after something sacred has been stripped away. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt foreign. Like it belonged to someone else. I placed the boxes on the kitchen table gently. One had the photo albums. The other had Greg's old fishing hat, the one he'd worn every Saturday for 30 years, frayed at the edges from sun and salt. I glanced around. The walls were bare. The magnet collection on the fridge was gone. The wooden spoon rack Greg built was replaced by some brushed steel contraption that looked like it came out of a catalog. The house had been edited, like a paragraph rewritten by someone who didn't know what the first draft meant. They didn't just want to change the house. They wanted to erase me from it. I walked slowly to the sink. The light from the window hit the counter just wrong. Too clean. Too curated. I opened a cabinet. The chipped blue mug Greg used every morning was gone. I opened another. The cookie jar Sophie painted when she was 7, gone too. It didn't feel like my kitchen. It felt like a stage. A performance of a home, stripped of the woman who made it one. I sat down. Quietly. My knees ached as I did. That familiar creak in the wooden chair still there, the only thing that hadn't changed. I stared at the table, at the 2 old boxes, at the nothingness of the house around me. And I felt it again. That same feeling I had on the porch. Not grief. Not anger. Not confusion. Clarity. They thought this house was theirs now. Because Michael paid the taxes. Because the deed had both our names. Because I didn't fight hard enough when they started calling the guest room theirs and repainting walls I'd spent years perfecting with Greg. But that's the thing about slowly giving parts of yourself away. You don't realize what you've lost until everything is gone. I got up and made tea. Not because I wanted it, but because I always made tea when something broke. A ritual of repair, even when I didn't know what I was fixing. I watched the flame flicker under the kettle, feeling the question build in my chest. When did I become a guest in my own life? I sat again, this time with the tea warming my palms. And then I opened the first box. There it was. A photo of Michael, 10 years old, missing a tooth, holding a fish with a grin too big for his face. Greg's handwriting on the back, first catch with Dad. Pacific Pier. July 1991. I held the photo for a long time. Not because it was precious. But because it proved something. That I had been here. That I had mattered. That this house wasn't just wood and wiring, it was mine because it held the story of my love, my sweat, my loss. You went through our things. That's what Mara had said when they visited my house last week for vacation. No. I preserved them. Because nobody else would. I sipped the tea. It was too hot. Still, I didn't flinch. The phone buzzed once, a voicemail from Sophie. Hi Grandma. Dad said you weren't feeling well. Just wanted to say I love you. Call me if you need anything. Not feeling well. Is that what they told her? I smiled. A bitter one. They were rewriting the story already. I could feel it. The way abusers do it in polite families. Quietly. Through suggestion. Through absence. Through 1,000 tiny exclusions that leave no bruises but break bones just the same. But here's the thing. I still own the pen. And they don't get to write my ending. The knock came just after sunset. Not loud. Not urgent. Just steady. Like someone who wasn't afraid to wait. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want company, but because the silence had finally stopped hurting. I wasn't ready to trade it for explanations or pity. I walked to the door slowly and opened it without speaking. There he stood. Thomas Whitaker. My neighbor for the last 15 years. Widower. Woodworker. Always smelled faintly of cedar and cinnamon. He wore the same soft gray cardigan he wore every fall, and in his hands was a small tin box. Cookies, he said, offering the tin forward with a small smile. Oatmeal raisin. Not the sugary kind. Thought you might need something simple. I didn't say thank you. Not right away. I just stared at him. I saw you come home, he added. Didn't look like the kind of return that ends in pie. His voice was low. Kind. Like someone who understood grief without asking for its origin story. I stepped aside and gestured toward the kitchen with a nod. He didn't comment on the boxes. Or the silence. He just walked in like he'd done it 100 times, like I hadn't just been shouted off my own porch 2 hours earlier. We sat in the kitchen. Me with my tea. Him with his thermos. He never trusted other people's brews, said he liked it just so. You keeping the house? He asked, not looking up from the cookie he was quietly breaking apart. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I said, did you know Mara called the attic their things? Like I was rummaging through a stranger's closet? He chewed slowly, then nodded. I figured it would come to this one day. That made me blink. Come to what? Them forgetting whose story they're living in. That sentence hung in the air like incense. Not bitter. Just true. I looked at him closely for the first time in years. Thomas had always been around. Fixing fences. bringing over excess tomatoes, waving politely from his porch. But now, across this suddenly sacred kitchen table, he wasn't just a neighbor. He was a witness. Someone who had watched the erasure from across the lawn and said nothing, until now. "You think I should sell it?" I asked. He shook his head. "I think you should stop asking what you're allowed to do." That hit hard. He took a sip from his thermos and leaned back in the chair Greg once sanded down himself. "You know," he said, almost wistfully, "when my wife died, I didn't change a thing for 5 years. Her book stayed on the nightstand. Her shoes by the door. And then one day, I woke up and thought, this house doesn't sound like her anymore." I swallowed. "So you moved?" He shook his head. "No. I carved her name into a wooden panel. Right into the frame. So when I sell it, and I will someday, her presence will still creak every time they open the front door." I smiled for the first time that day. It wasn't joy. Not yet. But it was the beginning of it. "What do I do, Thomas?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he stood, walked over to one of the boxes, and lifted out an old photo, Michael on his first day of high school, standing in front of this very house, gangly and proud. He turned it toward me. "You already did it," he said. "You remembered. Now decide what that memory deserves." He left quietly. No hug. No dramatic pause at the door. Just a gentle, "Call me if you need help packing. I've got strong arms and a soft truck." After he left, I sat there for a long time. Holding the photo. Holding the moment. And finally, I said it aloud. "I'm not going to apologize." The walls didn't echo. The furniture didn't react. But the air felt different. As if the house had just given me permission to let it go. The doorbell rang the next day at exactly 3:41 p.m. I know because I'd been watching the clock. Not out of nervousness. Just, out of longing. I hadn't expected her. But there she was. Backpack sliding off one shoulder. Hair in a loose braid. Cheeks flushed from the sun. That lopsided smile I've loved since she was born. "Hi, Grandma," Sophie said, a little breathless. "Dad said you weren't feeling well." But I knew that wasn't true. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She dropped her backpack by the couch and wrapped her arms around my waist. I didn't expect the hug. Not from a 13-year-old. But she held me like I was something worth anchoring. "I saw your boxes," she whispered into my sweater. "Are you leaving?" I didn't answer. Not with words. Just ran my hand down her braid and kissed the top of her head. We sat at the kitchen table together. 2 mugs of tea. 1 slice of leftover banana bread between us. Shared. The boxes still sat nearby, half open, their contents spilling out like ghosts, photo albums, Greg's compass, the old spice rack shaped like a chicken. "Can I help?" Sophie asked, already reaching for a photo. "If you want to." "I do." And just like that, we began. She pulled out a stack of Polaroids. One of her at age 3 in a pumpkin costume. Another of Michael, asleep on the couch with a newborn Sophie on his chest. "I love these," she said. "They feel warmer than the ones on Mom's Instagram." She didn't mean it to cut. But it did. Still, I smiled. We started labeling boxes. To keep. For Grandma. Too important to toss. She made her own labels too, scribbled on scraps of masking tape with thick Sharpie. Sophie's treasure chest. Smells like Grandpa. Do not touch, this means you, Dad. She found the hand-stitched apron Greg gave me on our 10th anniversary and immediately tied it around her waist. You cooked in this? Almost every night. She grinned. Can I have it? It's already yours. Hours passed like that. Soft conversation. Laughter tucked between nostalgia. A tear or two that neither of us tried to wipe. At one point, she paused and said, quietly, "Why don't they see you the way I do?" I didn't answer. Because I couldn't. Because the question wasn't fair. Because it wasn't hers to carry. Sometimes, I said instead, people stop looking once they decide what they're afraid to find. She nodded, like she understood more than her age should allow. Well, she said, sitting up straighter, they don't get to decide what you mean to me. Later, she found an old photo of Greg in his garden, grinning behind a bundle of tomatoes. He always smelled like rosemary and dirt, she said. And butterscotch, I added. Yeah, she said, laughing. And those gross hard candies he kept in his car. We both laughed then. Really laughed. And in that moment, the house felt like mine again. Not because it remembered me. But because Sophie did. As she was leaving, she hugged me again, longer this time. I can come back tomorrow, she said. I'd like that. And the next day, too. If you need help packing. Okay. She looked up at me then, eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in weeks, certainty. You're not alone, Grandma. I'm here. Always. I kissed her forehead. I know, sweetheart. And that's why I'm going to be okay. She walked to the door, paused, then turned back. You know what I think? What? I think you're the bravest person I know. Then she was gone. And for the first time since I stood on that porch, shouted it like a stranger, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Safe. Seen. Steady. It was Thursday morning when Thomas knocked again. This time he didn't bring cookies. He brought a file folder. And a question. You ready to find out what's really yours? I didn't hesitate. We drove in silence to a small legal office tucked between a juice bar and an old clock repair shop on Ocean Avenue. The kind of place that didn't need fancy logos or TV commercials. Just a door, a name, and trust. The receptionist greeted Thomas by name. Back so soon, Mr. Whitaker? Not for me this time, he said, placing a gentle hand on my back. We're here for Mrs. Parker. I was ushered into a private office with too many books and not enough light. The attorney, Mr. Lane, looked like he had lived 3 lives and lost sleep in all of them. Mrs. Parker, he said, shaking my hand with dry fingers. I understand you have some questions about your property. Yes, I said. I want to know what I still own. Not in sentiment, but in legal ink. He raised his eyebrows slightly and nodded. That's a powerful question. Let's find out. Thomas stayed quiet, seated beside me with his file folder in his lap, unopened. Just present. Steady. Mr. Lane pulled out the title documentation, a copy of the deed, the joint ownership agreement. It's listed as joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, he explained. You and your son Michael are both legal owners. However. He paused, tapping a line on the document. This clause here, occupancy and financial authority remains with Eleanor Parker until death or voluntary sale. That means you retain full control until you choose otherwise. I blinked. So. I can sell it? Even if he objects? He can protest, sure. He can drag his feet. But he can't stop the sale, unless he wants to pay you out in full, which, given his financials. I doubt. I breathed in slowly. Then out. And if I want to sell it to a buyer of my choosing? Entirely within your rights. And if I want to leave the proceeds to someone else? Again, entirely yours to do so. I sat back in the chair, the tension in my shoulders finally dropping after weeks, maybe years, of holding it there. That's what I needed to know, I whispered. Thomas reached over and placed a hand on mine. No words. Just a quiet weight that said, "You're allowed to feel this moment." And I did. I wasn't just a name on a mortgage. I wasn't just the woman who used to live there. I was still a legal force. A rightful owner. A person. "Thank you," I said to Mr. Lane. "What's next?" he asked. "Next," I said, standing slowly, "I decide what memory is worth preserving, and what isn't." Back in the truck, Thomas waited until we pulled out of the lot before speaking. "You looked taller in there," he said with a grin. "That was dignity," I replied. "Wore it well." We drove in silence, but it felt different this time. Not heavy. Just full of things that didn't need to be said out loud. Back at the house, I opened the drawer that held the property papers and tucked them in a fresh manila envelope. On the label I wrote, with no hesitation, "Ellie Parker, owner. Until she says otherwise." That night, I didn't cry. Didn't make tea. Didn't stare at the walls wondering if I was doing the right thing. I simply sat at the table, held the photograph of Greg in one hand and Sophie's drawing in the other. And I smiled. The next morning started quiet, like most things worth keeping do. I woke before sunrise. Made coffee. Listened to the silence that had once felt punishing, but now just felt like mine. The boxes still sat open in the living room, little timelines of my life, mid-chapter. I didn't rush to close them. Instead, I pulled out the manila folder I'd labeled the night before and placed it in my purse. Thomas picked me up at 9 a.m. sharp. His truck still smelled faintly of lemon oil and sawdust. He didn't ask where we were going. I just said, "Downtown," and he nodded. We parked outside the bank, white columns, glass doors, air conditioning that smelled of old pennies and ambition. I walked up to the teller and said, "I need to speak to someone about setting up a trust. For my granddaughter." A young man in a navy suit led us into an office with too much glass and not enough warmth. "Purpose of the trust?" he asked. "Security," I replied. "For her. And a message that no one else in this family has had the courage to give her." His name was Brendan. He had a wedding ring and a nervous smile. He clicked through his computer, reading clauses and asking quiet, procedural questions. Thomas sat beside me. Not speaking. Just there. Brendan paused when we reached the stipulations section. "Would you like to specify conditions for use? Age of access? Education clauses?" "No," I said. He blinked. "None?" "One," I said, leaning forward. "She never has to ask permission to use it." He smiled, but politely. Like he thought it was a sentimental flourish. It wasn't. The paperwork took an hour. By the time I signed the last page, I felt something loosen inside me. Like I'd finally handed Sophie a life raft I'd never been offered. I knew she wouldn't use it recklessly. She'd use it when she needed to leave a room that stopped seeing her. Because one day, it might come. And when it does, I want her to have the means to walk out with her head held high. On the way home, Thomas drove with one hand on the wheel and one resting quietly on his knee, tapping. "That was brave," he said. "No," I replied. "It was overdue. Same thing sometimes." Back home, Sophie showed up again after school, as promised. She dropped her backpack on the floor, pulled out a tangerine, and started peeling it like she lived there. Because in all the ways that mattered, she did. We sat on the porch. No agenda. Just the warmth of a California afternoon and the sound of gulls somewhere far off. "Grandma," she said, picking a bit of peel from under her nail. If you leave, will I still get to visit you?" I looked at her. The braid was messier than yesterday. her eyes somehow more certain. "Sweetheart," I said, taking her hand, "I'm not going anywhere you can't follow." She didn't say anything. Just leaned into me, head on my shoulder. A small, steady presence that filled every part of my heart that had gone hollow in recent years. I didn't tell her about the trust. Not yet. Not because I didn't trust her. But because I wanted it to be a gift, not a shield. And when the time came, I wanted her to open it and know. Someone believed in her future, without needing to see it first. That night, I made soup. Lentil. With a dash of cumin. Greg used to say it made the house smell like comfort. I set 2 bowls on the table. One for me. One for Sophie. She didn't have to say anything. She just pulled out a crumpled drawing from her hoodie pocket, another sketch of the house, this time with me and her on the porch, stick figures holding hands. She'd written at the bottom in careful print. "Wherever you go is home." And just like that, I knew. The money, the trust, the boxes, the property, all of it was just background. She was the legacy. He arrived in a gray Toyota, exactly 3 minutes early. The kind of man who shook your hand like he meant it but didn't linger. Polished shoes. Clipboard. A polite smile that didn't feel fake, just practiced. "Mrs. Parker?" he asked. "That's me," I said, stepping out onto the porch. "Eric Peterson." Appraiser. Thomas stood just behind me. He didn't need to be there. But he came anyway. Said he had a slow morning and a feeling you'd need someone around who remembers what this place smelled like before they started using citrus bleach. I smiled at that. Eric walked through the house slowly, methodically. He took notes. Measured corners. Tapped the walls near the baseboards. He didn't comment on the scuffed floor by the fridge or the slight slant in the hallway. But he did pause when he reached the back den. "This room has a nice energy," he said. I nodded. "My husband built the shelves. From scratch." He looked over the woodwork, impressed. "It's not just good craftsmanship. It feels lived in. Not staged." "Because it was," I said. "Lived in." He moved on. Took photos of the kitchen, asked about the age of the roof, jotted down some numbers about plumbing upgrades. Then he reached the hallway and paused at the photo wall. I hadn't taken them down yet. Michael at prom. Greg holding baby Sophie. Me in a sun hat, laughing with someone now long gone. "These yours?" he asked gently. They were. He didn't press. Just took a step back, angled his phone, and snapped one picture. Not for the report. I could tell. That one was for him. He wrapped up in just under an hour. We sat on the porch while he calculated preliminary figures on his tablet. Thomas handed me a lemonade without asking if I wanted one. I took it. Eric looked up from the screen. "It's a strong house," he said. "Structurally sound. Market still warm. Should fetch well over asking, especially with that garden and the natural light in the den." I nodded. "Good bones, huh?" He smiled. "Better than that. This house has heart." That almost undid me. Because I lived in it, I nearly whispered, but didn't. Not out loud. Instead, I asked, "Do you ever feel like the houses you appraise know what's happening?" He didn't laugh. That earned him my respect. "Sometimes," he said. "Some houses feel like they're letting go with you. Some fight it. And this one? Feels like it's waiting for permission." That night, I walked through the rooms one by one. I ran my hand along the hallway wall where Michael once measured his height in pencil ticks. I pressed my palm flat against the bathroom mirror where I once taught Sophie how to brush her hair. I opened the pantry and smelled the faint trace of cinnamon and mothballs, and maybe, just maybe, one last ghost of Greg's aftershave. I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered 3 words into the silence. You did well. To the house. To Greg. To the past. And then I called the real estate agent. It's time, I said. The real estate agent's name was Dana, and she didn't blink when I said. No open houses. No signs on the lawn. No weekend tours. I want it quiet. She looked up from her laptop, paused a beat, then smiled. You want a buyer, not a circus. Got it. I liked her immediately. Young, maybe mid-30s, with a steady voice and eyes that didn't flinch. She wore black slacks and a linen blouse, no jewelry except a tiny silver stud in one ear. Her nails were short and clean. You lived here long? She asked, not digging, just gently curious. 42 years, I replied, placing a folder on the table. But that's not the story I'm selling. No? No. I'm selling the freedom to make new memories. The bones come with it. She nodded and opened the folder. We walked through final listing specs together. She adjusted her valuation slightly higher than Eric's, citing charm, location, and emotional imprint. Buyers pay for soul now, she said. Especially in this zip code. Good, I said. This house has plenty. The paperwork was simple but symbolic. As I signed, my hand shook, not from doubt, not from fear, but from the gravity of it. Every letter of my name felt like carving a chapter's final line. The pen felt heavy, but in a way that told me I was doing something permanent. And right. Dana stood to leave. You'll get offers, she said. Soon. I can feel it. I'm not in a rush, I replied. You don't seem like someone who does anything in a rush. I liked that, too. Thomas arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't ask how it went. He just walked to the porch and handed me a single peach from his garden. Figured you needed something sweet. You're always showing up at the right time, I said. You ever think it's because you finally made room for someone to? We sat on the porch steps. The early evening breeze swept through the hydrangeas, and I peeled the peach slowly, juice sticky on my fingers. It's listed, I said. Good. Quietly. Even better. They don't know yet. They will. We were quiet for a while. Then he said something I hadn't expected. When it's done, when you sell. I know a place. A place? A cabin. Just down the coast. Quiet. Close to the beach. Close to mine. I often go there to spend some quality time. I turned to look at him. He wasn't smiling. Not teasing. Just steady. I'm not asking you to start something. Just end this somewhere that feels like you again. You think I'll feel like myself again? I asked. I think you already do, he replied. You just haven't realized it. That night, I called Sophie. Told her the house was listed. Told her I was looking at cabins near the ocean. Told her I was okay. She didn't cry. She just said, will it have a porch? Of course, I said. And will there be room for me? There's always room for you. The text came at 7:18 a.m. Dana saying. Full price cash offer. No contingencies. They want the house exactly as it is. Move-in ready. They said, we want to live inside someone else's memories. I read it 3 times. Then once more out loud. Move-in ready. No changes. No apologies. Exactly how I'd hoped it would end. I closed my phone, made coffee, and sat in the front room, the same one where I used to rock Michael to sleep, where Greg and I had danced barefoot the day we paid off the mortgage. It was all about to belong to someone else. And I wasn't sad. Not yet. By noon, I'd signed the acceptance papers. Dana handled everything with the same steady calm that had brought me to her in the first place. "You're officially under contract," she said. "Congratulations, Eleanor." "Thank you," I said. "I think I'll sleep for the first time in a year." But peace is rarely left undisturbed for long. At 6:42 p.m. the first message came. From Michael. "Michael. Just heard from Dana. You're selling the house? Without even talking to us?" Then another. "Michael. Mom, what is going on? You're not serious. This isn't funny." Then a voicemail. I didn't listen. The next morning, he showed up on the porch. Not with flowers. Not with Sophie. Just with panic behind his eyes. "Mom," he started, "you can't do this. You didn't even tell me. You didn't give us a chance to make it right." "I didn't open the screen door." "You had a chance," I said. "You stood on the porch while your wife screamed at me. And you said nothing." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." Mara came later. Not shouting this time. "You're really going through with this?" she asked, her voice tight, controlled. "Yes. Do you have any idea what kind of position this puts us in?" "I do," I said. "The same kind of position you put me in. Only this time, no one's pretending it's polite." They stood there. On the porch they'd once claimed as theirs. Now strangers. Now beggars. Michael stepped forward. "Just, tell me what you want." I looked at him. My son. The boy I'd fed and bathed and soothed after nightmares. Now a man who thought his silence didn't cost anything. "I wanted you to speak," I said. When it mattered. There was nothing left to say after that. They left. No promises. No threats. Just defeat. That night, I walked the house again. But it didn't feel like morning. It felt like a boundary drawn in solid stone. I texted Sophie. "Grandma got an offer. The house is sold." She replied instantly. "Is that good or bad?" "It's what needed to happen. I love you. And I'm proud of you." Later that night, Thomas knocks gently. He's holding an envelope. "It's the lease agreement," he says. "For the cabin next to mine. Signed and ready. Whenever you are." Ellie takes the envelope, looks out the window toward the street where Michael once learned to ride a bike. And finally says, "Let's go." The final papers were signed on a Thursday. It didn't take long. Just a few clicks, a digital signature, and the house was no longer mine. Dana called and said, "Congratulations." Thomas dropped off a bottle of apple cider with a smile. Sophie texted a string of heart emojis. But it didn't feel like a celebration. Not in the noisy, confetti way. It felt reverent. Like the end of a song that had played for decades, not with a bang, but with a single, graceful final note. I spent my last morning in the house packing the last 2 boxes. One labeled Sophie, first visit to cabin. One labeled only what I truly need. Everything else had already been donated, gifted, or stored. I walked from room to room slowly, not as a farewell, but like someone tucking in a child for the last time. Touching walls. Straightening blinds. Whispering thank you in silence. But the kitchen, that was the part one couldn't rush. That was where the life happened. Not the birthdays or the holidays, those were loud and fleeting. No, I mean the real life. The clink of coffee mugs on cold mornings. The smell of soup on sick days. Greg humming while washing dishes. Sophie's tiny fingers pressing cookie cutters into dough. This was where love lived, not loudly, but in repetition. I opened the drawers one by one. Pulled out the cutlery. Ran my fingers over the grooves in the old wooden spoon. Wiped down the shelf slowly. And then I reached for a marker. I began labeling drawers, not for me, not for nostalgia, but for whoever came next. Not with sticky notes. With love. In the drawer where the tea bags used to be, I wrote. This drawer held comfort. Refill it well. In the spice cabinet. Cinnamon for healing. Cumin for courage. Use both. Under the sink, taped inside the cabinet door. No monsters here. Just pipes. But if you're scared, sing. It always helped me. Inside the pantry. This space smells best on rainy days. Bake something. Share it. And on the fridge, one last note. A woman lived here. She was loved. She mattered. I folded the dish towel one last time and left it on the counter. I didn't cry when I signed the deed. I didn't cry when I gave Dana the keys. But I cried in the kitchen 'cause I loved here. And was loved here. And now, I had let it go. Thomas showed up right on time. Truck already packed. One last peach pie wrapped in a cloth on the seat beside him. You ready? He asked. More than I thought I'd be. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. Not once. Because when you leave on your own terms, you don't need to turn around. The tires crunched softly over gravel as Thomas turned off the coast road. We passed beneath a canopy of Monterey pines, their branches whispering above us like old women sharing secrets. A salty breeze floated in through the open window, not the sting of city ocean air, but something purer. More forgiving. You sure it's okay? I asked. I wouldn't have shown you if it wasn't, he replied, eyes forward. And then we pulled in. 2 small cabins. Tucked between dunes and beach grass. Nothing fancy, wooden steps, old shingles, white trim that needed painting. But there was a rocking chair on the porch. Facing the water. Waiting. I stepped out of the truck and walked slowly to the cabin. The sand was soft underfoot, even through the gravel. A seagull flew overhead. Somewhere, wind chimes sang. I opened the door. Inside, the cabin smelled like driftwood and soap. The kitchen was tiny. The furniture mismatched. But the windows, they framed the ocean like a painting. It's not big, Thomas said from the doorway. But it's quiet. And it's yours. I didn't say anything. Just stood in the middle of the room, feeling the hush in my bones. You okay? He asked gently. I turned to him. It doesn't feel like I left something behind, I said. It feels like I finally arrived. He nodded. Not with pride. But with understanding. That night, I sat on the porch and listened to the waves. I didn't bring a book. Didn't scroll through old photos. Didn't need distraction. I just was. And the waves kept coming, over and over, not asking where I came from, what I'd left, or what I'd lost. Just whispering. You're here now. Thomas joined me after sunset, 2 mugs of tea in hand. We didn't talk much. Just sip. Watched the sky bruise into purple. Listen to the slow hush of tide and time. I keep thinking about the word widow, I said after a long silence. What about it? It means someone who lost something. But I didn't lose Greg. He's still with me. I lost permission. Permission to be someone. You took it back, he said. I think I did. The next morning, I wrote my first journal entry from the cabin. In pen. On paper. Like Greg used to say, write it so the ink remembers. I wrote. I am not gone. I am not erased. I am here. Not as a guest, but as a woman who chose the door she walked through. And just as I finished the last line, there was a knock. I opened the door and there she was. Sophie. backpack on, hair windblown, holding a sketchpad and a bag of oranges. Dad said you moved. I did. I took the bus. I blinked. By yourself? I told the driver I was visiting my grandmother on the beach. He said, I hope she has cookies. I do. She grinned. Then it's official. This is home. The days began to form their own rhythm. Not the old rhythm of carpool schedules, dinner planning, missed calls, and careful conversations. No. This was new. Measured. Mine. Morning. Tea on the porch. A sweater draped over my shoulders. Notebook in my lap. The ocean, always breathing. Sometimes Thomas would join. Sometimes not. There was no clock between us, no need to explain where we were or weren't. His cabin stood quietly next door, light in the window, smoke curling from his chimney when he was baking. I never knocked. But I always felt welcome. Midday. Walks. Along the beach, sometimes barefoot, sometimes not. I started collecting sea glass again. Greg used to tease me for it, said I had jars of soft edges hidden all over the house. I left a jar on the windowsill. This one was just for me. Afternoons. Sophie visited every other weekend. Sometimes more. She brought books. Drawings. Gossip from school. She brought herself, not in pieces, not in polite hugs, but all in. We baked. We talked about Greg. We talked about how healing doesn't always look like getting stronger. Sometimes, it just looks like not running away anymore. One afternoon, she said, "You don't seem sad anymore." I looked up from the dough we were rolling. "I'm not," I said. "But I'm not exactly happy either." "I'm right." "Right where you're supposed to be?" "Right in who I'm supposed to be." She smiled. "That's better." Evenings. Dinner, sometimes alone. Sometimes shared with Thomas. Simple food. Real conversation. No over-explaining. No walking on eggshells. One night, he brought over grilled fish, 2 glasses of white wine, and said, "I've been meaning to ask something." "All right. Do you want to grow tomatoes with me?" I laughed. Not because it was silly, but because it was beautiful. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." Sometimes we said nothing at all, just listened to the wind. I'd forgotten what it was like to be around a man who didn't try to fix everything. One afternoon, while Sophie was sketching the waves, she asked, "Are you and Thomas, like dating?" I paused. "No, sweetheart. We're just existing beside each other." "Is that good?" "It's perfect." The cabin became more than a refuge. It became evidence. That I could start over. That I didn't need to perform to be loved. That I wasn't done. I planted herbs. Hung Sophie's drawings. Added a new coat of pale green paint to the front door. The rocking chair creaked every night. The sea answered back. And the house I left behind? I never drove past. Never looked up its listing. Never asked who moved in. Because some things are meant to be released without regret. The wooden box sat on my table overnight. I didn't open it right away. Not because I was nervous. But because some gifts deserve stillness before they're unwrapped. The next morning, I brewed tea, pulled on Greg's old windbreaker, and pocketed the key. Thomas met me on the porch with a smile. "You remember how to get there?" "I remember you said it was mine." "That's enough." We walked together. Down the side of the cabin. Past the rosemary bushes we'd planted last week. Through a split in the trees just wide enough for a woman and her memory. The trail wasn't long. 100 steps at most. Woven through wild fennel, soft sand, and pine needles. And then it opened. A small clearing. Grassy. Gentle. Protected by a crescent of trees. At the center stood a structure, part greenhouse, part shed, part temple. Wooden. Weathered. Waiting. Thomas stopped at the edge of the clearing and gestured. Go on. I stepped forward and used the key. The lock clicked open like it had been expecting me. Inside, dust floated in long stripes of morning light. An old desk stood against the far wall, next to shelves already lined with pots, books, jars of dried lavender. There was a chair, a tin watering can, and a small window that perfectly framed the sea. And carved into the back of the door, in weathered script. To whoever finds this place, use it. Love it. Leave something behind. Who built this? I asked. Couple that owned the land before me, Thomas said. Artists. She was a poet. He was a gardener. Never had kids. When they passed, they left the cabin to me with one request: keep the trail open. Keep the space sacred. Why give it to me? Because you still have something to write. Something to plant. I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped inside fully. Ran my hand over the desk. Opened one of the drawers. Found a piece of folded paper and a pencil, still sharp. And then I sat. And I wrote. Not to anyone. Not about anything grand. Just, the truth. I am not healing from a wound. I am growing from a root. My past is not my prison. It is my proof. Outside, Thomas waited patiently. He never asked what I wrote. That evening, I returned alone. Brought one of Greg's old flannel shirts. Hung it on the back of the chair. Brought a jar of sea glass. Lined it along the sill. And on the shelf, I left a note of my own. I lived here. I listened. I left peace behind. The wind shifted that afternoon, just slightly. A faint tension in the air. Birds moved differently. The waves a little louder than usual. I was planting herbs in a small terracotta pot near the porch when I heard the car. Gravel. Tires. Too familiar. I stood slowly, brushed the dirt from my hands, and waited. Michael stepped out first. Hair messier than I remembered. Hands fidgeting. Then Mara. Still polished. But her face was different. Not smug. Not angry. Just, tired. Mom, Michael said. Eleanor, Mara added, quickly, correcting herself. I said nothing. We just found out you're here, Michael continued. We wanted to see you. Talk. Maybe visit the cabin. You found out from Sophie, I said. He hesitated. Then nodded. We wanted to apologize, he offered. For how things ended. For that day. I crossed my arms, not in defense. In definition. That day didn't end anything, I said. You made your choice after it. When you didn't follow up. When you didn't knock. When you let silence do your talking. We were overwhelmed, Mara interjected. I was unwelcome, I replied. They both looked away. Not because they disagreed. But because they couldn't deny it anymore. We just thought, maybe, you'd want to reconnect, Michael tried. Why? Because we're still your family. I studied him. Are you? You were my son. But you became someone else. Someone who couldn't look me in the eye while your wife rewrote history in front of you. That's not fair. It's not untrue. Silence stretched. And for the first time I didn't feel small inside it. I felt tall. Steady. Owned by no one. We miss Sophie, Mara said, voice softer now. She's been distant. Cold. Because she saw who I was to you, I said plainly. And she decided I was still worth something. Michael stepped forward, one last attempt. Can we just see the cabin? The new one? I shook my head gently. No. This space was made with gentleness. And you don't walk into gentleness with entitlement. They stood there, waiting for something to shift. For softness. For grace. But grace isn't the same as surrender. I hope you both find peace, I said. But not here. Not with me. Thomas stepped onto his porch next door. Didn't interfere. Just watched. A quiet witness. Michael looked at him, then at me. Is this your life now? No, I said. This is my choice. That was something I gave up long before I left the house you helped erase me from. I just finally reclaimed it. They left without another word. No shouting. No drama. Just two people who realized too late that some doors close with silence, and stay closed. I didn't cry. I walked back to the herb pot. Finished planting. Then went down the trail. Opened the sanctuary. Sat at the desk. And I wrote. They came back. Not to reclaim me. But to see if I'd forgotten. I hadn't. And I never will. The sky that morning was pale lavender, soft and forgiving. Sophie slept in the guest room of the cabin, her sketchpad resting on her chest, one arm flung across the covers like she'd landed in peace. Thomas was already out in the garden, tending to his tomatoes, whistling some forgotten tune. I walked barefoot to the beach. Not as escape. Not to mourn. Just to meet myself there. The sand was cool, the tide low. Waves lapped gently, like breath. Like memory. I sat on a flat rock and let the wind tangle my hair. And I thought. I used to believe endings came with applause. Or music. Or tears. But real endings? They come like this. A morning where you feel whole again. A breath that doesn't carry pain. A silence that isn't empty, it's earned. I picked up a piece of driftwood, soft and curved. Wrote with my finger in the sand. I was here. I mattered. A wave washed it away within seconds. But I didn't mind. Because I didn't need to be remembered by the ocean. I remembered myself. When I returned to the cabin, Sophie was awake, curled on the porch with a cup of tea. I made it too strong, she said with a grin. You'll learn, I smiled. We sat together, watching the tide roll in. You okay, Grandma? She asked. No, I said. I'm more than okay. You think they'll try to come back again? Maybe. But that part of me isn't open anymore. Thomas joined us later. He handed me a small potted mint plant. For your porch, he said. Something fresh. I placed it by the rocking chair. Do you regret anything? I asked him quietly. Only the years I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, he said. But I don't regret today. We shared a meal that night, fish, roasted vegetables, and lemon cake Sophie insisted on baking herself. There was laughter. The kind that rises not from comedy, but from relief. From love without transaction. Later, I walked down to the trail one last time that day. I opened the sanctuary door and left behind my final note on the desk. To the next woman who finds herself here. Don't wait to be invited back into your own life. This space is yours. So are you. As the sun sank into the sea, Sophie climbed onto my lap like she used to when she was little. Do you feel like it's over now? She asked. No, I said, pressing my chin to her hair. I feel like I just began. Because here's the truth. The ocean doesn't apologize. It doesn't ask who it hurt. It doesn't explain its tides. But it always returns. Always offers a horizon. Always brings something back, if you're willing to stand and receive it. And me? I stood. I recede. And I let go.